Have you ever noticed how your mind can get stuck on one thing? You just keep going in circles with it. You replay something that happened. You go over what was said. You think about what you should have said instead. And you imagine what the other person meant. And then you start imagining what might happen next. And even though it feels like you're trying to figure something out, nothing actually gets resolved. In fact, you just feel more tired. This can happen at a very specific moment in your day. For example, you're standing in the shower and you suddenly are back in the conversation from earlier, or you're driving home and you replay something small that now feels much bigger. You're lying in bed and instead of winding down, your mind starts picking up one thread and pulling it again and again. Or someone takes a bit longer to reply to a message of yours and your mind starts filling in the gaps. You wonder if something is wrong. You go back through your last message. You check the tone. You think about what you might have done. And before you even notice it, you're in a full loop. What is important to understand is that this doesn't happen because you're overthinking in a random way. It actually follows a pattern. And once you see that pattern, it becomes much easier to step out of it. So let me walk you through what is actually happening. It usually starts with something small, a trigger. And that can be a look, a message, a memory, a tone of voice, a mistake, or even just a thought that appears out of nowhere. On its own, that moment is not the problem. What happens next is what turns it into a loop. So the mind tries to make sense of what just happened. It tries to find clarity. It tries to create certainty. So it starts going over the situation. You replay it, you analyze it, you add more thoughts to it. What did they mean? Why did I say that? And this part feels very convincing because it feels like you are being responsible. It feels like you are trying to understand. But what is actually happening is that the same emotional state is being repeated again and again. You're not moving through the experience, you're circling it. And the more you circle it, the stronger it becomes. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine you send a message to someone you care about. Maybe it's very normal, just a very simple message. They do not reply immediately, and at first that's neutral. And then a thought appears. That's a bit unusual. A few minutes later, you already think, maybe something is off. And then, did I do something wrong? This is the moment your body starts to react. There's a slight tension. Your attention narrows and you check your phone again. Now you go back to your message and you read it again and you start to analyze your own words. And that leads to another thought. Maybe I sounded strange. And now the loop is fully active. The original situation hasn't changed. The other person has still not replied. But inside, the experience has grown. And this is how rumination builds. It builds by adding layer after layer of thought onto one moment without ever resolving the feeling that lies underneath it. And this is where the nervous system comes in. Because underneath all of this thinking, there's usually a feeling. That might be uncertainty or fear. It might be insecurity. It might be a sense of not being safe or not being sure what's going to happen. Fact is, the body feels something. And instead of staying with that feeling, the mind starts working. It tries to think its way out of the feeling. It tries to find an answer that will calm the system. But thinking doesn't resolve the feeling. It just keeps the system activated. So the mind keeps going. And the more it goes, the more the body stays in that state. This is why the loops feel so exhausting. You're not just thinking. Your whole system is repeating the same state again and again. There are also things that make the loops stronger. For example, if you're already tired, your system has less capacity to regulate. So a small trigger turns into a big loop. If you haven't slept well, your mind is more likely to go into these exact patterns. If you're already feeling overwhelmed, everything feels more intense. If there's something unresolved, like grief or a past experience that hasn't been processed, the loop has more material to attach to. So the same situation can feel very different depending on the state that you're already in. That's why sometimes you handle something calmly, and other times the same kind of situation pulls you into a long spiral. Now, the important part is this. If the loop is built through repetition, it can also be interrupted. Not by forcing your thoughts to stop, But by changing what you do in the moment, the loop begins. The first step is noticing. You start to recognize the moment where thinking turns into circling. And there is a difference between reflecting once and going over the same thing 10 times. So you might notice, I have already thought this 3 times. That awareness alone creates a small gap. And the next step is to come back to what is actually there right then. Not the story, but the feeling. Instead of continuing the thought, you pause, you make a break and ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now in here? It might be something very simple. I feel uncertain. I feel a bit anxious. I feel uncomfortable. And then you stay there for a moment, not analyzing it, not explaining it, just noticing and welcoming it, accepting that it is there and that it is okay. Actually holding this feeling, bearing it, accepting and welcoming it already shifts something that lets your entire system release itself. The sensation can transform from a lump in your throat into a warmth in your chest or a sense of just space that wasn't there before. At the same time, you can bring your body back into the present. You might take a slower and longer exhale, or you might move your body slightly, or you might look around the room and notice where you are. Maybe you start counting. I always say, count 5 round objects. This helps your system realize that you're not in danger. Because most loops are driven by a sense of something not being resolved or not being safe. But when you bring your attention back into your body, you give the entire system a different signal. And over time, this changes the pattern. It doesn't mean the thought will never come back, but the thought loses its grip more quickly. And because you're no longer feeding the loop in the same way, you're not adding more layers. You're actually dissembling them. You're not building the story further. You're allowing the feeling to move instead of keeping stuck. And this is where the shift happens. Because once the feeling moves, the need to keep thinking about it reduces. You do not need to find the perfect answer. You just need to stop repeating the same cycle. Most people try to stop overthinking by trying to control their thoughts, but that usually doesn't work. What works is understanding the pattern, seeing where it starts, recognizing what keeps it going, and then gently stepping out of it. Not in a dramatic way, but in a simple, quiet way. You notice it, you come back to yourself, and you do something slightly different. This is how the loops change. And once you start seeing this in your own life, you will notice how often it happens. Not in a form of shame that you think you're doing everything wrong all the time, but because your system has actually learned this way of trying to create safety. And now you're learning a different way. If you want to understand this more deeply and start changing these patterns in your own life, you can subscribe to this channel. I'll keep sharing more on this.